My name is Jackie Malton. I was a detective with the Metropolitan Police for over 25 years. My real-life experiences on the front line as a woman investigating crime became the inspiration for the TV drama Prime Suspect. Oh, good morning, Pete. My name's Jackie Malton. Once a detective, always a detective. It never leaves. And now I'm going back on the road, on the job, and I'm looking at some of the worst crimes ever committed in the UK and the USA. In a series of exclusive interviews, I'll be talking one-to-one to detectives and experts to find out how they brought the killer to justice. This is the story of what it takes to find the real prime suspect. The case I'm revisiting now fascinates me because it's unique in British criminal history. It was a completely new area for the police handling the case, stretching their resources and skills in order to find the killer. A very interesting case of Suzanne Greenhill, a young girl, 20 years of age, who was both deaf and dumb, had a kind of social life within the community, deaf community within Newport, and was violently murdered and raped. And this was a case where the police made fantastic contacts through the deaf community, who they thought were extremely supportive, and without the deaf community's support would have had difficulty investigating this murder. So it was a very, very unusual case. It took 7 months. They all worked extremely hard to get the conviction of Timothy Robson, another deaf person, for the murder of Susan. I'm now going to speak to Mark Waters, who was the senior investigating officer in the case of Suzanne Greenhill.
Mark Waters.
Mark, good afternoon. My name's Jackie Malton. I'm ex-detective from Scotland Yard. And one of the cases that we would like to look at is the case of Suzanne Greenhill. I understand you were the senior investigating officer in this particular murder.
Yes, I was, yes.
Could you just tell me a little bit about it, Mark, please?
Well, basically, she's a poor young girl with a serious disability, communicating, both hearing and speech. And she was found murdered in the Kinder area of Newport.
And what were the difficulties facing you as the SIO?
Well, she was, as I said, seriously disabled with communication problems. Most of the people we needed to speak to had the same problem. So we really had to try and interview people that, with this disability, and get specialists to come along and assist us with the interviews and understanding how they understand the time and incidents that have taken place. So their recollections are not as straightforward as people with normal hearing and speech.
Yes. Mark, thank you very much for your time. I really look forward to meeting you and discussing greater detail about Susan and the conviction of Timothy Robson. Would that be okay?
Yes, that's fine. Look forward to seeing you.
Thank you, Mark. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
This case is the murder of Suzanne Greenhill, a young deaf woman living in Newport in South Wales, murdered by Timothy Robson, a member of the deaf community, and off to Newport to meet the detectives. She was determined to be an independent woman, and she had a boyfriend, and she went to work, and she had a cat, and she lived in a lovely flat. She did her best to be kind of living a normal life in spite of being profoundly deaf. And the deaf community gave her some form of kind of support as well, and identification and a sense of community.
Mark, can you tell me about the scene when you arrived?
Yes, it was a flat, a single person's flat in Tewkesbury Walk, Newport. At the time, it was about 6 o'clock on that evening. They found a body. I entered the flat after the scenes of crime had visited, and they were present there. And there was this young lady being stabbed in the throat. She had tape across her eyes. Her lower clothing had been removed around her ankles. I obviously set in motion a murder investigation, but called a pathologist. I looked around the flat, and I noticed that in the bathroom there was blood everywhere, so pretty certain to me that whoever killed her had tried to wash himself in the bathroom. And I was feeling fairly optimistic at this stage. There was such a mess, such a lot of blood there. I thought he must have left something behind. My own scenes of crime, people said, look, there's nothing here. We've got no fingerprints. We have got the body covered in red fibres, but fingerprint-wise, there's nothing.
And was there evidence that she had been sexually assaulted?
Yes, there was evidence that she'd been sexually assaulted. And as it later transpired, we were told that, or I was told that there was a very low sperm count, and it was the early days of DNA, and that I would not get DNA off the samples that were there.
Could you tell, Mark, when the person had sex with her, before consensual or not, or after death?
Well, her pants are around her ankles, and she was stripped basically from her waist down. Her pants were totally clean. So we found semen inside her, so she'd had sex recently, but that semen wasn't in her pants.
Yes.
So what had happened to her, she hadn't stood up.
Yes.
The other thing she had was a serious injury, or fairly serious injury on her chin. So she'd been punched very hard. So it looked very much as though she'd come home, gone into her flat, disturbed someone, because right next to where her body was her dirty washing, clothing, underwear. And it was right next to there. And
had that been disturbed?
Yes.
So it looks maybe that somebody was going through her underwear.
Through her underwear, yes. And she'd come in, disturbed them.
Was in her flat.
Yeah.
She came in, disturbed them.
Yeah. And whoever punched her hard, dropped her to the floor, I would imagine, with that sort of punch. I think she'd fractured her jaw, and then stabbed her in the throat, and then taped her eyes, which was very strange.
So the perpetrators entered the flat with the tape ready.
With and a knife.
And a knife.
Yeah.
With the full intention of killing her.
Of killing her.
God, terrible. Was there any evidence of forced entry?
No evidence of forced entry, but unfortunately the local people in the area said she always left the door open and she was out and about chasing her cat. But she'd leave the door open for the cat to come back. Yeah. But there certainly was no forced entry. And we took the view that it probably somebody she knew. But then she did have a wide circle of friends. I then had a call from South Wales Police, our regional criminal investigation department. We shared their services, and they sent 2 experts up to look at the scene to help us out, really. And they came back and said, look, we think we found a fingerprint. It's a partial left thumbprint in blood on the bedroom door.
Right.
So obviously that was a start. And we started matching our suspects against this left partial fingerprint.
Not one person amongst the community matched the fingerprint found at the crime scene. But despite this, a suspect emerged within the group. 29-year-old Timothy Robson, who was also deaf. So why did Robson become a prime suspect?
It was just the fact that some of the people around him were frightened of him. The others seemed to be scared of him.
And was
he seemed to
Robson...
be a dominant sort of character.
Did Robson have a deaf impairment too?
Yes, he had it, but unlike most of the others, his was from an injury when he was about 3, and it wasn't quite as serious as some of the others. So his was a result of an injury. He was married, and to all intents and purposes lived a fairly settled life. He obviously mixed with friends that he had with the deaf community, and he played snooker. He belonged to the old snooker club. Well, we knew things were bad with his wife, and she had gone home to mum during the course of this investigation. Now, whether that was pressure because of the investigation, or she knew something else had happened, and she went to her mum's, which is again an area why I suddenly started to think he's probably one of our suspects. But I couldn't pressure it because I didn't have the evidence to go there. I had, in fact, contrary evidence. I had evidence that it wasn't him. So that was a difficulty.
One of the things, again, about working on or re-looking at these cases, that I'm dealing with highly experienced and professional detectives who have kind of been a detective for most of their service. This is a particularly fascinating case where, the police have gone into a world they know nothing about, of course, and it's about communication, and all investigation is about communication. The investigation had to be done through interpreters, people who are signers within the deaf community, and also understanding the communication differences between hearing and non-hearing people. I don't personally have any experience of working with deaf people. I can only imagine how hard it must have been for the team. So I'm on my way to meet Detective John Stafford.
Hi, John. This is Jackie Malton, former detective from the Metropolitan Police. I understand you were the operations manager for the Suzanne Greenhill case, and I'd like to speak to you about how you faced the challenge of questioning the deaf community.
Hi, Jackie. Yes, that was a difficult inquiry, very prolonged, with a lot of lessons being learned. I'm happy to discuss it and look forward to meeting you.
John, we're obviously both ex-detectives, and the importance of reaching victims and talking to them as quickly as one can to elicit information is highly relevant and important, obviously. But what were the complications then when you're dealing with a smaller, let's say, deaf world?
Right. It was a particularly difficult inquiry because the inquiries that we had to make with people with those impairments, if you were to speak to somebody directly, then obviously you would need an interpreter unless you're conversant yourself. So you would never look at that, or the person you were interviewing would never look at you. They would always be looking at the interpreter. You had to rely on the interpreter's ability to convey to that person what you were actually asking them. And it was a difficult inquiry in as much as that every interview in relation to a person that that impairment took a lot longer, and there are certain words that would be used that perhaps there was no immediate sign that the interpreter could convey.
Did you feel a sense of powerlessness in some aspects of it?
Not really, because the community that we were stepping into were so welcoming, and really were desperate to help, because obviously it's quite an enclosed world, and they were doing everything possible that they could to assist us. So I wouldn't say I felt powerless. It was just the frustration of having to go through a very elongated process for even the minor questions that you would want to ask.
So in an investigation, and we obviously are keen to find the prime suspects, and we have a number of suspects that start to emerge, what was it that you recall that Timothy Robson starts to come into the frame as a potential prime suspect for this?
Together with a number of other people, Timmy Robson would have been interviewed, initially not necessarily as a suspect, to try and identify his association with Suzanne, his potential whereabouts at the time of the incident, and really then it was a question of cross-checking. If I recall, Timmy was interviewed a number of times, or seen by the police a number of times, because obviously if his name was mentioned by another witness, then we would go back to verify it. That was the system that was used then, and it's still used at the moment.
As hundreds of interviews were conducted by the police, Timothy Robson's name kept coming up. But finding evidence against him was harder. The fingerprint found at Suzanne's flat wasn't his. The police investigation was going round in circles as they tried to piece together the evidence they had. It was made harder by the fact that everyone involved came from the same small, tight-knit, insular group who were all deaf. I'm on my way to meet Betty Powell, who was friends with Suzanne.
I knew her because she was profoundly deaf, and I was brought up in the deaf world because of my parents and all my friends profoundly deaf. So I knew Suzanne very, very well.
Betty runs a social club for local deaf people in Newport. Many of the members remember both Suzanne and Timothy Robson. To get a better understanding of how this murder case affected them, Betty has agreed to take me along to meet them.
As you know, that we have looked at the murder case of Suzanne Greenhill. And I was just wondering if anybody here, I know you knew her, anybody here knew of Suzanne Greenhill?
Lovely girl.
Yeah,
Lovely girl.
She's a lovely girl. Very nice talking.
Very nice talking.
Very
friendly.
People talking. Yeah.
So the people that knew Timothy Robson, what was he like as an individual?
June knew, I think June knew him. He wasn't very nice to his mum. His mother was a skinny old woman. So that's what the words she said. And he always said to his mother, buy me a cup of tea or make me a cup of tea. Go and make me a cup of tea. And his mother was very nervous of him and said, all right, I'll go and make it.
Do they remember the police investigation and the police coming to speak to them?
They came, they went to her flat all the time. Two policemen came to see me at Aberystwyth, because that's where she was at the time.
Oh, okay.
And they came to see her.
And did the lady provide a statement to the police?
I gave loads of information to the police. They asked her loads of questions as well.
Two policemen went to my work.
Came into his work to interview him.
What happened? He said, oh.
And I was shocked, and I said, what's happened? And they said it's about Suzanne Greenhill.
They come over to the police station.
Came to the police station.
Then fingerprints.
Asked me questions and took my fingerprints, and that was it.
The community is essential to policing. Absolutely essential. We have to get the community on board, and that's through talking and it's through listening. And especially in the Suzanne Greenhill case, the deaf community was paramount to that investigation because it's about communication. We needed the deaf community to help the police to find out information, intelligence, to understand a world that for a normal hearing person we know nothing about.
I'm on my way to meet a psychologist and specialist in the specific challenges faced by the deaf community, Professor Mike Berry. Shockingly, his research shows that deaf women are a particularly vulnerable group.
The problem with young deaf females is they are incredibly vulnerable. They are sexually assaulted at a much higher rate than hearing girls and things like this. We're talking in terms of 40 to 50% of the deaf community are being sexually assaulted. So this has worrying effects because quite often they're assaulted by other deaf people. The other thing is, in the deaf community, they are very paranoid at times about people's interactions and sensitivity, and they can become oversensitive and think people are being negative towards them. Some research that a student and I did some time ago, we found that a lot of deaf people think they're being stalked, when in fact it's just ordinary communications. But because they can't get feedback, they interpret it as stalking.
Is a picture emerging of a man there who would probably suggest why the attack was so frenzied? You spoke about sensitivity, if he felt that he had been rejected by Suzanne Greenhill.
One of the problems we find in the deaf community is any criminal action tends to be very much of a physical nature. Deaf people commit proportionally a higher number of physical crimes rather than, say, acquisitional crimes. And that's partly due to the fact that they are victims in society for quite a lot. And for some of them, they acquiesce to that. Others actually start coming back, and you get this high level of regression because they are angry with the way the world is treating them. And to a certain extent, you can understand that anger because it's appropriate. But some of them will then act that out in the community. Now, that can then become seen as or perceived as rejection by the deaf person.
Mark Waters and his team were convinced the person who killed Suzanne wasn't an outsider, but came from within the community and knew her. They were trying to conduct the investigation as sensitively as possible, but were no closer to finding a prime suspect. After 5 long months, the investigation into the murder of Suzanne Greenhill was stalling. Timothy Robson was a key person of interest, but there was no evidence against him. I know from my own experience this is a frustrating moment in any investigation. So I'm returning to see Mark Waters to find out how he progressed the case.
Like with Robson was a suspect, but I got to be very careful how I dealt with him. I couldn't sort of just drag him in and search his house or whatever because I had this fingerprint that wasn't his.
Yeah.
All I had was people didn't like him, basically.
Doesn't make you a murderer just because people don't like them.
Of course it doesn't. But it's a start. So I was left with a situation where I had a fingerprint, partial fingerprint, which was hampering anything I was doing because all my suspects were just being wiped out. So I had a good look at it, spoke with my senior officers then and said, right, we'll start again. We'll start from scratch. I contacted Scotland Yard and I said, right, send me some of your fingerprint experts. I want you to look at this fingerprint to start off with and let me know if this is misleading us.
Because you felt that intuitively?
Well, yes, because we were going nowhere with this, you know, and it was just churning and churning and churning. So I asked them to come up. They came up, they took a look at it, and they said, that's not a fingerprint. The striations on the back of that door were caused by a candlewick dressing gown flashing blood. So it looked like a fingerprint, but it wasn't a fingerprint.
Wow.
So then, with that, I could now get into Robson. So I arrested Robson, or picked him up, interviewed him, went to Robson's house and searched it. We found a red Welsh pullover with Welsh feathers on it. And I said, right, we got fibres on that body, red fibres. Let's try and do a match. The lab said, yes, there's a match for that jersey. These fibres are exactly the same as that jersey. So whoever's wearing that jersey, we think this. But I had to go further than that. I had to get to the source of that jersey. I had a detective, Stan Porosinski, who did a really first-class job. He sourced that jersey. It was actually made in Austria, dyed in Italy, and 500 of these were sold in Newport, in the Noel Triggs sports shop. So we had a source of these jerseys in Newport. Courtaulds Institute looked at it, and they said, right, this is fairly cheap material. So from the time that material left the factory, it was continually changing. Sunlight, heat, what it was washed with, how the heat of the washing machine,
the dye was
temperature,
changing.
the dye, everything was changing. So unless you had a jersey that was treated exactly the same as Robson jersey, those fibres wouldn't match.
Yep.
You know, so we could virtually say that was just like a fingerprint.
If you hadn't done that detailed work, then the defence could
We wouldn't
easily...
have had a, we wouldn't have charged him. We were satisfied from one witness that she was killed on the Tuesday night. Tuesday night, where was Robson? He had said he had been to a snooker match at the Orb Club. It turned out the Orb Club said, yes, there was a snooker match, but people arrived, but the other team that they were supposed to play didn't have enough players, so it was abandoned. Interviewed these people later, and they said, yeah, but we didn't see Robson there. He might have said he was there, but he wasn't. So then we concentrated on his wife, and he was separated from his wife at this stage. So we concentrated on her and took her very slowly.
Was she part of the deaf world?
Yes, she was a deaf girl. Anyway, when we worked on her then, as soaked her, she said then, yes, he came back, he had scratches all down his face, he was covered in blood. He washed his clothes, which he'd never done in his life before. Everything went in there, even his trainers went in the washing machine. And then he took them all out.
And he gave no explanation?
No, he said he was in a fight in Newport.
He said he'd been in a fight?
Yeah.
Okay.
We then went to his work, and his workmate said, yes, we saw him come in the next day, he was covered in scratches down his face. He gave us 3 different explanations for them. One was a fight, one was he fell off a stool in a bar, and I forget what the other one was, but he gave 3 different stories.
It's important in any investigation to get to know the geography of the case. So I want to visit the place where Suzanne was killed to get a feel for the location myself. Alan Chown, a detective constable with the initial police team at the crime scene, has agreed to go with me.
So this is the flat here where the murder took place. And this was the home of Suzanne Greenhill, who was 20 years of age at the time. The alarm was raised by her boyfriend, who found her, and then a few of my colleagues then arrived and did the scene of the murder. My first input in relation to it was later on that day when it was found it was a very heavily blood-stained scene, and the perpetrator had walked into the bathroom in his socks, and he had left a socked shoe print in blood on the tile in the bathroom. And I was asked to speak to the forensic science laboratory to see how they could assist us with that shoe print. I went away and made some phone calls, and eventually a research establishment in London contacted me and told me that they may be able to look at the pressure points within the sock itself to identify the size, possible height of the person, and possibly the age as either being a child, an adolescent, or an adult. But they needed the tile. So at some stage then I've gone up there and assisted in removing the tile and sending it up to London. Later on then, after the person was arrested, Timothy Jack Robson, I then took his fingerprints and footprints when he was in custody. The way I had to do it was to have and what we used in the old days, an old telex roll, about 12 foot of paper, which I rolled out along the fingerprint room. I then sat him down, inked his feet, and then I asked him to walk across the paper. The paper was rolled up, sent away to the research establishment. They then looked at the pressure points within the footprints that I had sent up. And for the court purposes, they'd identified all the pressure points of the foot, and they did an overlay with the footprint that I had sent in order to establish it was made by the same person. And that's the footprint side that I was looking at.
Alan was also a part of the team who searched Robson's flat.
I remember going there with the sergeant to look at the flat, and the first thing that struck us was on the wall there was a long-playing record cover on the wall, and it had a demonic person on there, stood over a woman who was blindfolded, and he was stabbing at her. And obviously the implications of that and what we had seen at the scene, you know, we wondered whether perhaps he was fantasizing about doing a crime of that sort.
You're a very experienced detective, scenes of crime officer with Gwent for a long, long time, Alan. Was this one of the worst murder scenes that you've come across?
It definitely was. The level of violence that was used against Suzanne was unusual at that particular time, and particularly with blanking the eyes off and putting tape over the eyes, which was very unusual. So yes, it was. My colleagues that actually did the scene for a long time spoke about it as being one of the worst ones that they had seen.
All murder is violent, obviously. This is even more ultra-violent.
Absolutely.
On a woman who's 20 years of age, who's got her life together, supportive family, supportive deaf world, and the recipient of such a frenzied attack, and the fact that she could not have screamed out for help.
Raised the alarm. That's quite right. Quite right.
The investigating team were hugely affected by the violence in this case, but unsurprisingly, it left the local community reeling. I'm going to speak to a man who lived close to the murder scene, who remembers what happened.
There's a gentleman here called John, lives at number 18, who was present at the time when Suzanne was murdered. And again, to reinforce the importance of communities and how they help police, and when we do house-to-house inquiries and things like that. It's really important, isn't it?
Absolutely is. A lot of our information comes from the community anyway.
Yes, absolutely. That's it.
Hi,
Hi, John. Hi. Hello, hello. I understand that you were a resident here, John, at the time of Suzanne Greenhill's murder.
That's right, yeah.
Did you see her out and about?
Well, yeah, she used to be, you know, I believe she used to be over the, I think it was St. Julian's, where the Deaf Society.
Yeah.
But other than that, you know.
So her death must have come as a big shock to you.
Oh, yeah. Well,
how did it affect the community here?
Oh, a lot of people they were shocked, you know. You don't expect it, do you?
Absolutely not.
You know.
Was there a lot of police activity here that you remember?
Yes, a lot.
Okay, did the police come and see you?
Oh, yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, John.
Yeah, thank you.
When you do house-to-house inquiries and you meet people like John, and we have done, haven't we, and what he said was really, really interesting.
Yes, indeed.
Although he lived quite close proximity, but he didn't know, but he was aware of her. So the whole point about in this inquiry was over 3,000 house-to-house inquiries done within this area of Newport, and everybody has something to say that forms part of the jigsaw of the bigger picture. So you might think maybe that when we meet people, it's insignificant at the time. But it is important.
Of course it is. It's that little, as you say, piece of the jigsaw that you need to be fitted. And that could come from somebody that was seen, a car that pulled into the street. It could be somebody hanging around at a certain time. And it's that one piece, as you quite rightly say, that we need to put that jigsaw together.
And that's why it's important to have community police officers who know the community, that talk to them, that allay any form of fears. And that's why it's really important, I think, that in the heart of any of the communities, you've got these community officers.
You're absolutely right.
Murder happens in a community. It's not in an alien planet over there. It's here where people live and they work and they play, right in the middle of the heart of a community, that this would happen. People would say, I would never expected that to happen here. But sadly, it did. What strikes me about this case is what a fantastic job the police did in dealing with the particular needs of this deaf community. Armed with the new forensic evidence and witness statements, Mark Waters and his team built a watertight case against Timothy Robson, and he was charged with the rape and murder of Suzanne Greenhill. But for Mark Waters, the case didn't end there.
I had to go to Exeter to a forensic meeting. While I was there, one of the forensic scientists came to me and said, good news about Robson. And I said, what do you mean good news? And he said, we've used the signal locus probe, we've got DNA.
Robson had 2 retrials. Originally, Robson's sperm count was so low, it wouldn't provide useful evidence for the case. By the 3rd retrial, there had been rapid advancements in DNA, so a new test was available, and that new test provided concrete evidence against Timothy Robson.
Anyway, there was a new trial, new defence counsel, but we had DNA this time. Now his defence was, yes, I had sex with her, it was consensual, and I left her, she was alive. Well, that didn't wash because her pants were, unless she'd been hopping around with her pants or her ankles, they were spotless. There was nothing on them.
This time, Robson was found guilty of the murder of Suzanne Greenhill, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum tariff of 25 years. The police's job is to find the murderer and find enough evidence to convince a jury. Often, as in this case, detectives never get the answer to a much more human question. Why did he do it? I'm off to see forensic psychologist Dr. Julian Boone, who can hopefully shed some light on why Robson committed this horrific crime. When you have experienced cases of multiple stabbing, frenzied stabbing, what does that indicate to you as a psychologist?
Usually it's not always, but usually it's the expression of anger. And then you have to look for what the motivation for the anger is. And it may well be latent within the individual, or it may be an act of provocation by another individual. And of course, the alternative would be something like paranoid schizophrenia. Robson's marriage to his wife was very much on the rocks. And only a few days after, as I understand it, the case was started. She went off to live with her mother. You can have another form of rage expressed, which is known as anger retaliatory. So you don't do it necessarily against the person concerned, although you can. It can be anger retaliatory displaced onto somebody else. So it's possible that that was going on in the background. Look, you bitch, you're going to get this. You know, that kind of motivation.
As a psychologist, have you come across that where the eyes are hidden, and of course she's deaf, so she can't speak?
Yes, it comes in 2 forms. One is deliberate sensory deprivation, whereby the offender is absolutely doing their best to frighten the individual. Now, we know that Suzanne had profound deafness, which effectively means she couldn't hear anything. So if you rob her of the sight element of it, whatever he's doing, she can not have any understanding beforehand. And there may be a secondary angle to it of a fantasy element that he enjoys blinding or effectively robbing her of her eyesight during the sexual act. And that's quite common, actually. If you go to various sex shops, I gather you can buy masks and blinds and things like that, and it's effectively a fetish. So that would be an alternative explanation, and it could well be that Robson has some form of fetish about using masks and so on to do that. But my money would still be on the sensory deprivation and maximising the sadism of the event.
And what was quite interesting is when they searched his flats, they found an album copy of the Iron Maiden.
Oh, yes.
And on this particular one, you can see that the body is in a certain position, and in this particular one, there was tape across the eyes, and they just thought, whether that was a mimicking of that album cover.
I find that one hell of a coincidence, frankly, and cannot be discounted that that isn't deep in his fantasy structure. And that is very common in this sort of crime.
This really was a tragic case, a close-knit community torn apart by the death of one of their own, killed by one of their own. This was a monumental investigation for Gwent Police. Mark Waters was head of CID, and you don't get a top job like that if you don't learn from every case you take on.
So what was the most significant factor that you remember about this case, Mark?
First of all, the evidence as respect the fingerprint. You know, expert evidence, be very careful with it. That's the real lesson. And don't be frightened to start again.
Yeah.
Start from scratch.
Yeah. You know, that is quite phenomenal, isn't it, that you can say, right, let's start this again. How many months down the line, blank page, forget everything you already know, and let's have an open mind and search for the truth.
Because you can put it more into more perspective. And that's where I think it's important.
Thank you, Mark, for sharing that fascinating investigation with us.
Thank you.
Each and every detective that I've spoken to has been really affected by this murder. Here we have a young woman at 20 years of age to be taken away at that young age in such a frenzied attack on a very vulnerable woman. It's just so sad. And each of those detectives felt it. And they feel that of all the murders that they dealt with, this one is the one that stays with them, the murder of this young girl. Murder is murder. It's a violent act. But this was particularly violent, and she couldn't even cry for help.